Well, friends, it's great to be with you again. I'm excited to be able to open Scripture with you like we've been doing and continue on this journey together. We've been doing a little bit of a series on and off on Jesus and his culture, Jesus and his time, but a chaotic world, right, is what we've been calling it. And I love it because we live in a chaotic world ourselves right now. And I need to see how Jesus handles these things. I need to be able to see that God's got us in these moments when we don't feel like everything's working the way we want them to, right? A couple weeks ago, we jumped into the story of the paralytic. We talked about bringing your friends to the feet of Jesus and allowing people to bring you to the feet of Jesus. We jumped into the story out of Mark because we spent some time there with the demoniac at Susita, and the fact that the storyline happening there, that even when we don't understand what's going on, God's at work, and he is doing things for his glory. And so today we're gonna leave Mark, which makes me kind of sad because I love Mark a lot, but we're gonna jump into Matthew. So if you've got your Bible, open up to Matthew chapter 16, and we're gonna start there in verse 13. So Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, and it says this: When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now, friends, this is a completely loaded, amazing question. And I think one of the most important questions, if not the most important question in the entire Bible. But right there it says, when Jesus comes to the region of Caesarea Philippi. For people at that time who are hearing this, remember, Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience. And so Matthew writes this, and all the Jewish people reading this go, whoa. And then there's us who goes, yeah, cool, Caesarea Philippi. Right inside that one line, we get tons and tons of information that we've got to kind of backtrack a little bit to understand. And always in the context of understanding the scripture, we need to look at what Matthew happens to tell us just previous to these things. And so if we kind of go back a little bit into Matthew chapter 15, and before, we see that Jesus' ministry is in full throttle. It's going forward. We've got miracles happening. We've got preaching. All of these things happen. And then in chapter 16, we're going to get this transitional period where Jesus is going to now begin to focus on the fact he's going to have to die, death and resurrection. He's going to begin to maneuver the ministry that direction. So the disciples have been with Jesus for multiple years at this point. They've seen the feeding of the 5,000. They've seen the feeding of the 4,000. They've seen Jesus walk on water. They've seen him calm the storms. They've seen him heal people. And they've heard all these teachings that he's given. And so they've been with him for a while. And that's all happened previously. Chapter 15, we get the feeding of the 4,000. And then chapter 16, and I just wanted to highlight this for a second. I wish that we had more time to jump into some of these. Chapter 16, we get this awesome moment where Jesus finishes up the feeding of the 4,000, and then it says here in chapter 16, when he went across the lake, the disciples forgot to bring bread. "Be careful," Jesus said to them, "be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." They discussed this amongst themselves and said, "Is it because we didn't bring bread?" This is hilarious because they've been with him forever, right? And they're super concerned about bread. And what did he just do earlier? He fed the 4,000. He fed the 5,000. So Jesus calls them out on that. And the only reason I highlight that for you for a second is because I love that Matthew, again, writing to a Jewish audience, he's a part of this storyline, and he's not afraid to tell you that the disciples didn't get it some of the times. And so here they get kind of rebuked a little bit of going, you guys, you've been with me and you're concerned about this? So if you ever feel like you don't fully understand what God's got going on, don't worry, the disciples didn't either, and God still worked through them. So he's got a plan for us too. But here we go. Into chapter 16 is where we're going to kind of head, is this question of going into this place of Caesarea Philippi. So we're going to kind of pull up some slides here. And the first one here is a map, and it's got a whole lot of things on it. So I want to walk you through it. If you don't like maps, I'm sorry. I love them. I think they really help us sometimes see what's going on. But we've got this area up here, and you're going to see that there are multiple colors on this map. And that red dot is Caesarea Philippi. Now, where Jesus' context was just previous to this statement is that he was down in the Galilee. And then all of a sudden, Matthew says, oh, and then now they're up in Caesarea Philippi. So they had to make a little bit of a journey to get there. So to give you a little bit of context on distance, If you were to go from Jerusalem, because everything's about Jerusalem when you get over into the land, it's about 110 miles from Jerusalem to Caesarea Philippi. So it's a little bit of a distance there. That would take you about 4 to 5 days. In the ancient world, a person could walk about 26 miles a day. That's, if you were to walk, you could usually do about 26 if you were in good shape. So you would find that you would have cities built on these routes every 26 miles. Interesting for all of you runners, because I hear we have some runners out there. A marathon, right, is 26 miles. And that's because the city of Marathon was 26 miles from the city of Athens. And so during that whole storyline of the Battle of Marathon, they ran from Marathon to Athens. And so we get kind of the story of a marathon coming up from that point. So 26 miles. If you were to go from Damascus, which is northern, we can't see it on this map, to come down to this location at Caesarea Philippi on the trade route, you'd be 40 miles, so 2 days' journey. If you were to go from the Sea of Galilee, which is where our story takes place, 25 miles from the Sea of Galilee up to Caesarea Philippi, so a day's journey, maybe 2 if you were taking your time. And so that's kind of the distance that we've got that they're going to journey. They're going to go at least a day's journey north. And then we got to understand the first century that we have a lot of different people in control of the area. And so there's a guy by the name of Herod the Great. He dies. And when he dies, he had control of this entire area. He kind of worked for Rome, if you want to call it that. Rome kind of elevates him in charge. He taxes the people, pays Rome, and Rome loves him. But then he dies, and 3 of his children end up taking over the regions. They're not as strong as he is, and so they take over the regions. There's 3 of them. So if you look on the map here, you're going to see that there's a green area, and that green area is ran by one of Herod's sons, and his name is Antipas, Herod Antipas. And so he runs the Galilee region, and his capital city is a place called Tiberias, right on the lake. If you look at another one here, kind of in the orange area, this is a guy named Archelaus. And Archelaus is going to kind of take over the Judah region, the Judean region. So you've got Jerusalem, and you've got a bunch of the other cities in that area. And he's a really, really bad ruler. He's not a good one at all. And so very quickly into his ruling, he kind of gets replaced by a guy that you've all heard about named Pilate. And so Rome sends in one of their own guys to kind of take over that location. And then you've got another one up toward the top, and it's going to be kind of in the reddish pink, and that is Herod Philip. And he is going to set up a place called Caesarea Philippi, and it's in the northern regions. And then that blue one is the Decapolis. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Rome keeps full control over that region. So you've got all these different people, but our story is going to take place in a place called Caesarea Philippi, which is in the northern region. And it was a capital that was built a long time ago. And I want to show the next photo here just to see how nice and there's waterfalls. I mean, when you think of Israel, most people think of the desert, not the desert in the north. This is amazing. There are 4 different, basically, springs or rivers that feed the Jordan River. One of them is called Banyas, and that's the one in this photo here. I was with a group of college students here, and we had just done a hike. And it's beautiful, lush, green. And this is the area of Caesarea Philippi. And so from early on, people had been settling there. The Canaanites were there a long time ago, back in the time of Abraham, and they set up shop there. And what you're going to notice is that in Israel, there are a lot of different gods that the children of Israel have to deal with. Because remember, they come into this new land. Well, when you're out in the desert, for the Israelites, they're learning about Yahweh, a desert god, because they're out in the desert. They come into this new land, and it's told to them, Moses says, when you go into the land of the vineyard you didn't plant, the wells you didn't dig, the houses you didn't build, don't forget God. Because they come into a land such as this right here that's very fertile. And all of a sudden they walk into it and they go, oh, the gods of this land must be strong, because look at this. Look at all the water. Look at all the fertility. And so there were fertility gods. And the Canaanites worshipped a god named Baal. And so in this region of where it would become Caesarea Philippi, Baal was worshipped. And so you had all these fertility gods over time, and then a person that you've maybe heard of before by the name of Alexander the Great in 320 BC begins to conquer the known world. Makes his way into the part of the Middle East that we're in here, and he conquers into what we call modern-day Israel or biblical Israel of the time. And what he would do is, as he would conquer areas, he would give as a payout to his soldiers, he would give them land. And this worked out really good because he didn't have to, like, it was money that wasn't his, it was someone else's land. They conquered it, he just gave it away. But it also left Greek culture in these places. And so as he conquered through here, he left a bunch of his soldiers here who had been working for him for a long time. They settled down in this area, and with it, they bring the worship of the Greek gods. And so you're going to get a god here by the name of Pan that shows up, and he is a fertility god as well. So let's pull up the next slide just so you can kind of get a glimpse of this good-looking guy. Pan was half man, half goat. I remember growing up, there were some different cartoons, and maybe if you're older, you remember these cartoons, and they were this man who's half man, half goat, and he'd have a flute, and he'd be playing the flute, and people would be following him. That's Pan. So Pan worship has been found all over. It's been found in Egypt, it's been found in the Greek areas of Athens and in that region, and it's here in Israel, in this area called Caesarea Philippi. And so Pan worship, Pan, he's basically the god of, he's a Roman and Greek god of shepherds and goat herders. He's associated with fertility. And what you're going to see, kind of if you look towards the very back of this picture here, there's a giant cave. In that cave, water comes out of it, and this is one of the springs that feeds the Jordan River. And so again, in the ancient times, the feeling was this is a entryway into the gates of hell. So down below into this crevice, down in this area where this water comes out is the underworld. And in Greek mythology, this guy Pan, his dad is Hermes, and Hermes is the messenger between realms. He goes all over the place. And so the belief is that Pan, and this is the same with a lot of different fertility gods, Pan would die every year, and he would go down to the gates of hell, he'd go down into the underworld, and that if there was going to be fertility to happen back on earth, they would have to convince Pan to come back from the dead. So he's a resurrection god. And he'd have to come back. And if he came back from the dead, it would bring fertility. And so this entire region right up here is all wrapped around this concept of making Pan happy. Let's go to the next slide here really quick just to give you a artist rendering of this. So this is the foot of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is the biggest mountain in this part of the region. And this is the bottom of it, this rock area at the bottom. And so they created all their worship areas right here. And so by the time of the 1st century, Herod the Great has built up this region. So the first thing you see on the left, Herod the Great built himself a big monument temple, and this temple is the Temple of Augustus. And so he's again showing his patronage to Rome. And he builds it right on top of Pan's grotto, or the cave where Pan would come out of. And he's doing something there. He's basically saying, Pan comes back to life and Pan brings us prosperity, but now I'm also saying that the Caesar in Rome does the same thing. So again, this is Herod just showing these things. And so he built that. Right next to that area is a area for Pan. And so again, Pan had a bunch of worship spots, and then next to that was a temple to Zeus, and then next to that was a temple to the sacred goats. Because remember, Pan's part goat. And by the time that Herod Philip comes along, he says, you know what? My dad built up this city. I'm going to make it even better. I'm going to make all the people want to be here. He names it after himself. He calls it Caesarea Philippi. And he tries to pull everybody this direction. Now, the Talmud and a couple of the other writings of the Mishnah, these are Jewish writings that come a couple hundred years later, but they talk about the fact that a place like Caesarea Philippi during the 1st century was so grotesque that no Jewish person would want to be up there. No one would be caught in this region up in Caesarea Philippi. And without going into too much depth, I want you just to understand how bad this place was. Think of it this way. When I grew up in California, we used to see ads all the time for people to go to a place called Vegas. And the ad growing up was, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It was just this idea that come pleasures, do whatever you want, there's no consequences. Same concept here. You had all these religions, you had all these things going on, and Pan religion was very, very just grotesque, and it was immoral. And they would have basically priests and priestesses who were prostitutes, and so you would go, and part of giving your giving your offering to Pan is that you would have relations with these priests and priestesses. And then the place of the sacred goats was a location where people would have relationships with animals. And so leaving it there, this is a grotesque, gross, immoral place. And so all of a sudden now when you reread this part right here that Jesus says, it says here in Matthew that when Jesus goes to the region of Caesarea Philippi, every Jewish person's like, oh my goodness, why would they go there? And so Jesus takes his disciples, one of the last teachings he's going to do, he walks them all the way up there. Could have taken a day, could have taken 2 days, we don't know. We don't know what he teaches them on the way. We don't know if he talks to them or not. And he takes them to the region. Now, do I think he takes them inside? Probably not. But when I'm there, I love to teach up on a hillside where I can look straight down at this location. And Jesus brings them there to ask them one of the most important questions. It says this: when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. What a great answer. He asked the disciples, hey guys, who do people say that I am? And they quickly come back and go, they think you're one of the heroes of the faith. You're like Elijah. You're like Elisha. You're like Jeremiah. This would be like, when I grew up, we loved to play baseball in the World Series around. I don't know if you caught the game last night. I'm a Dodgers fan, so that was a sad loss at the very end. But we would grow up playing baseball, and we had our favorite people. And so we would play this game where it was basically a pitcher and a batter. And so if you were a batter, you were Jose Canseco. And if you were a pitcher, you were someone like Nolan Ryan or Oral Hershiser. And we would just play these games. So if there were trading cards in the Jewish kids growing up, guarantee you Elijah, Elisha, Jeremiah, these are the heroes. And so the disciples go, people think you're like one of them. Awesome. But what does that mean? And so Jesus turns to them and goes, okay, but who do you guys say that I am? And Simon Peter speaks up. He says, you are Christ, the Son of the living God. This is a completely different answer. Some say you're a great person, but I'm saying that you're God. You know, there are a lot of great people out there who have a lot of great things to say. You think about it just in our world, like Gandhi had a lot of good things to say. You could look at other religious people who are out there, the Buddha or Confucius or whatever. You might think they have some good things to say, but they're not God. So come to the end of the day, that you can't look at that. You can go, okay, maybe there's something to say there. You can even get into the Christian world and say, you know, John Piper or whoever it might be, like these are good people, but they're not God. C.S. Lewis, they're not God. And so you can take someone like that and you can take what you like and take it and throw out what you don't. But when you ask the question, if you say that you're the Son of the living God, that doesn't leave a chance for you to change it up. You see, we live in a world, and I found this with college students all the time, is that the college students and some of the Christian friends who I was around, they loved to say that Jesus was Son of the living God, but they treated him as if he was somebody else. I'll take what Jesus says that I like, but I'm going to get rid of the things I don't like. There's so many things that make my life a little bit more difficult. I don't want that. But friends, if we say that Jesus is Son of the living God, we don't get to throw out the other parts. It requires us to live the way he calls us to live. And so this is the big moment here for the disciples. Am I just one of these people, like a prophet, or am I God? Because if I'm God, it changes everything. It changes the way you live, the way you act, what you do. Well, Peter gives this answer, and we all love that answer. And Jesus replies, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he warned the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. Completely crazy moment right here. Hey, you're Jesus. You're the Christ. Hey, thanks, Peter. That's right. Hey, guys, don't go tell anyone else that. Why does he say that? Because Peter doesn't get it. We already saw that the disciples are still not understanding it fully yet. And so Jesus makes this statement to him. He goes, you're right. This is the right answer. But how are you going to live it? What are you going to do with that? And not even the gates of hell will prevail. And I love this line here. And there's a couple different ways of looking at it. You've got the Catholic Church and a lot of Christian just history that looks at it and goes, hey, the church is built off Peter. And I believe that is true. The disciples and the apostles, it is built off of. But when you get a chance to go to the land as well, you begin to realize as you stand in this place of Caesarea Philippi, which Jesus walked all the way up to with him, that it's a huge rock complex. You know, is it possible that part of what Jesus is saying, even though Peter's name is going to turn to Petros, which will be rock as well, as that's the Greek name for it, is to go, even in this place, even on this rock I will build my church. My kingdom will come. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Well, listen to our good friend Peter here, because Jesus steps in. This is the transitional moment. From that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and must be killed, and on the third day raised from dead to life. Hey, guys. Yeah, I am the Christ. And here's what's going to happen. Here's the next stage. As we leave Caesarea Philippi, here's what's going to happen. This is a tough moment to hear these things. And Peter, I love him right here. Peter took him aside. So just a second ago, Peter's sitting there going, hey, Jesus, you're God. Thanks, Peter. And then Jesus says, hey, I'm going to have to die, and this is the plan. This is what's going to happen. Jesus, come here really quick. Kind of takes him off the side around his arm, and he begins to rebuke Jesus. He says, Jesus took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. Jesus turned to him and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, and you do not have the mind of the things of God, but the things of man. We can get into this whole talk later, but this is right here is a Jewish pushback onto Peter of just going, you say that I'm God, but all of a sudden now you're telling me this isn't going to happen? You've got the mindset of what Satan wants, not what God has for us here. This is the plan, and this has to happen. Then Jesus said to his disciples, and what I like to do when I'm teaching in this location, like I told you, like we're up on this hillside, we're looking down at this area with all of these temples and all of these things. I can imagine Jesus sitting on top of it, and I can imagine him yelling these things down. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone was to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. And then check out this part. What good would it be for a man if he gains the entire world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Right below where they're at, everything you could ever want is there. You think about if what I told you about pan worship was that immoral, imagine what the city was like. And Jesus is sitting there going, people are drawn to this place because they're willing to give up all these things for their soul, trying to fill it with something else. But following me is what's important. And the question of who do you say that I am, that's what's important. Because that should change the way you live your life. I'll just finish with this last part here, because maybe we can get together and have a talk on this next part, because it says, for the Son of Man is coming in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will be reward each person according to what he has done. I tell you the truth, that some who are standing here today will not taste death, and they will see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Awesome statement, transfiguration right after that, so that's a whole other concept for another time to talk about. But Jesus walks these guys all the way up to a grotesque, immoral place called Caesarea Philippi to ask him one question. Who do you say that I am? Friends who are out there, my hope is that when you answer that, you know the answer to who it is. He is the Son of Man. And my hope is that that dictates the way you live your life today. But if you find yourself in a place where you don't know how to answer that, we'd love to chat with you about it. Or if you find yourself in a place where you answer that, but you look at your life and you go, but I choose not to fully live what Jesus calls me to, that's a place where we've got to We got to fix it. We got to change that. That's what we're called to. I always finish off my time at Caesarea Philippi, and I bring people in and I ask the question, what are the worst things that just seem so big in life that we don't know what to do? And we just go, the world is so evil, it's so chaos, it's so bad. God, what are you doing? And we talk about those feelings of those places. And then I go, friends, we're standing in Caesarea Philippi. We're standing in this pagan area with all these temples. And I go, check it out. The Greek gods are not here anymore. Rome's not here anymore. Pan's not here anymore. None of these people are here anymore. Caesarea Philippi is not here anymore. But we're standing here, and we represent the church. Because Christ's kingdom is the kingdom that will not fail. So even the gates of hell will not prevail against the kingdom that Christ has coming, and we get to stand there in victory of going, we are that kingdom. Will we live for him? Let me pray for us. Lord, such a simple question, but it's one that can really only be answered by the way we live our lives. And Lord, when I think about it in the chaos of where we live right now, the greatest thing that people can see is someone who's consistent with how we answer that question. If you are Son of the living God, then we need to live our lives believing that and showing that. And so, God, would you convict us in the places that need to be convicted, and would you continue to work in us? And when people see us, Lord, I pray that they see Christ as we continue to live out what you've called us to. I give you today, Lord. Amen.